This is problem 4.03 from the CFA Institute textbook, Corporate Finance Practical Approach. And here we're asked some questions about operating leverage, break-even units, and the impact of those on company profitability. The Fulcrum Company produces a product that sells for $100 each. The variable production costs are $65 each, and the fixed production costs are $1.05 billion, and they produce 40 million units per year. So let's write down what we know. So the P, which is price, $100. Q, which is variable cost. All right, so that's price, variable cost is $65 per unit, or about 65% is the cost of goods sold, which leaves them a gross margin of about 35%. They have fixed expenses of 050,000. Those are the fixed expenses. All right, and then their target production is 40 million units. All right. And A, generate positive operating income if unit sales were 25 million. Okay, so what we could say is, I know what the price, we go with actual production, or alternative production, here at 25 million units. Would that produce a profit? Well, revenue would be 25 million units times $100 per unit, or $2.5 billion. The cost of goods sold would be $65 per unit times 25 million units. So that'd give me a gross profit of 875 million. The fixed operating expenses would be 1,050,000, and that'd give me operating income of negative 175 million. All right, so we can immediately rule out A. A is not true. 25 million units wouldn't get it. Okay? So if fixed production costs were 10% greater than 1.05, would they have less operating leverage? Okay, well, the definition of operating leverage, and I'm going to go ahead and use the actual target production numbers. So at 40 million units, we're expected to make $350 million in operating income. To calculate the degree of operating leverage, that's simply the gross profit, or the contribution, which is the revenue minus the variable cost, divided by the operating income. Okay, so that's the amount before fixed costs divided by the amount after fixed costs. So it's actually the relationship between this, which we will call contribution, the variable costs, or variable operating costs, and the fixed operating costs, Okay, so the degree of operating leverage is that number divided by that number. The amount before the fixed cost divided by the amount after the fixed cost. Now, the question says, question B, would they have less operating leverage if fixed production costs were 10% greater? All right, the higher the fixed production costs, the greater the degree of leverage. Okay, but we could check that simply by copying all this. That'd be the same. That'd be the same. But if we multiply that by 1.1 or 1.05, what was the problem say? 10% greater. All right, so if the costs were 10% greater, the higher the proportion of fixed cost to total cost, the higher the degree of operating leverage. Okay? So with no change in the revenue and no change in the variable, but simply having higher fixed operating costs, that would cause the degree of operating leverage to go higher. By the way, if we were to go out there and look at maybe trading some of these costs, the variable operating costs, if we could convert them to fixed, let's say that we could change this from $2.6 million to from 2.6 billion to 1.6 billion by converting variable costs to fixed costs. So this would be 2,050,000,000. Notice that that would increase the operating leverage even further. That's one of the things businesses often try and do is convert variable costs to fixed costs. If you had salespeople that were being paid a commission and you converted them to a fixed salary, that's exactly what you would have just done here. Okay, so generally speaking, the higher the proportion of fixed to variable cost, the higher the degree of operating leverage. Okay, so A wasn't correct and B wasn't correct. They would have more operating leverage if they increased the fixed cost. And that leaves C as the correct answer, and it says generate 20% more operating income if unit sales were 5% greater. Well, that's where that degree of operating leverage actually comes in. The degree of operating leverage gives us the elasticity of operating income to changes in unit sales. So basically, we would have the percent change in operating income would be equal to the degree of operating leverage times the percent change in sales. All right, so the problem said, all right, the change in operating income would be equal to, if there was a 5% increase in sales, that would translate into a 20% increase in operating income. Okay? Of course, we could have done that down here as well, simply by doing the math here. Times 0.05. The variable cost would have done the same thing. The fixed cost wouldn't have changed. And if you take the percentage change here, we can see that the percent change in operating income, we'll just do it all the way down here. The revenue would go up 5%, so the variable would go up 5%, which means that the contribution margin would go up 5%. Fixed would go up nothing, and the operating income would go up by 20%. So that's what that number means. Degree of operating leverage is how much the operating income would change given a change in revenue. All right, and the revenue caused by operating, the increase in the number of units sold. And that's that.